Hello, Libra. I'm really glad you're here. Before we begin, I just want you to settle into this moment with me. Take a slow breath and allow yourself to be fully present. There is something about today's reading that feels incredibly quiet, yet incredibly powerful at the same time. It feels like a conversation that has been waiting in the background for much longer than either of you expected. As I start laying out these cards, I keep sensing that someone has been carrying words they never found the courage to say, and those words have only become heavier with time. The first card that catches my attention is the Five of Cups, and immediately I feel someone looking backward instead of forward. It doesn't seem like they're trapped by the relationship itself. It feels like they're trapped by their own memories. They replay certain moments over and over, wondering how everything could have unfolded so differently if they had simply chosen another response, another conversation, another moment of honesty. It's almost as if every quiet night has become another reminder that distance didn't happen overnight. It grew little by little through hesitation, pride, and moments that neither of you thought would matter, until they suddenly mattered more than anything. Then the Six of Cups gently enters the reading, and everything softens. Yeah, this feels deeply emotional. I don't believe this person has forgotten you for even a second. In fact, it seems as though the simplest memories have become the loudest ones. A familiar place, a song, a certain hour of the evening, even ordinary routines somehow pull them back toward you. They remember how patient you were. They remember how many opportunities you gave this connection to breathe, to heal, to move forward. And the more they remember, the more they realize something that is becoming impossible to ignore. I keep seeing justice resting quietly between the two of you. Not as punishment, not as someone winning or losing. More like a mirror that neither of you can look away from anymore. There is a feeling that this person has finally begun to recognize their own part in creating the silence. For a long time, they may have believed there would always be another chance, another day, another message waiting whenever they were ready. But something shifted when your energy became quieter. When you stopped chasing answers, stopped carrying the weight alone, they began to understand that patience has its limits, even for someone with a heart as generous as yours. Okay. And then, the Hermit appears, almost whispering instead of speaking. This doesn't feel like someone who has moved on. It feels like someone who has been forced into deep reflection. They're asking themselves difficult questions they once avoided. Why did they wait? Why did fear become louder than love? Why did they convince themselves there would always be more time? Those questions don't seem to leave them anymore. They follow them into quiet mornings and restless nights. And somewhere beneath all of that reflection sits one thought they cannot escape. Does Libra still have a place for me? That question isn't being asked because they're confident of the answer. It's being asked because they're finally beginning to understand what your silence actually meant. And the more that realization settles into their heart, the more it feels like something inside them is preparing to change in a way they never expected. It feels like this person became so focused on protecting themselves that they never realized they were slowly pushing away the very connection that made them feel alive. Sometimes people mistake emotional distance for emotional control. They convince themselves that if they reveal less, they'll hurt less. If they wait a little longer, if they keep everything perfectly contained, somehow everything will naturally fall back into place. But I don't think life works that way, Libra. I think love quietly asks us to meet it halfway, and this person kept standing behind a wall they built themselves. Justice comes forward again, almost like it's refusing to leave the table. I keep sensing that they're looking at their own reflection with much more honesty than before. Not because someone forced them to, but because silence has a strange way of removing every distraction. They can't keep blaming timing. They can't keep blaming circumstances. Deep inside, they know there were conversations they walked away from, messages they rewrote 100 times but never sent, feelings they buried because vulnerability felt far more frightening than pretending everything was fine. The Four of Pentacles carries a very quiet tension here. It's almost as if they believed holding everything inside would somehow keep them safe. They held on to control, held on to certainty, held on to familiar patterns. Yeah, I keep hearing someone say, if I don't say too much, I can't lose too much. But what they didn't realize was that love doesn't disappear all at once. It slowly slips through the spaces we refuse to open. Every feeling they locked away became another unopened door between the two of you. Okay, when the King of Cups appears, I don't feel someone who lacks emotion. Quite the opposite. It feels like there's an ocean inside this person that very few people ever get to see. They may appear composed on the outside, even confident, but underneath that calm surface is someone who has been carrying emotions they never learned how to express. They wanted to appear steady. They wanted to seem unaffected. Maybe they thought that showing too much love would somehow make them lose their balance. Yet every attempt to stay emotionally guarded only created more loneliness than they ever expected. I keep sensing moments when they almost reached out. Maybe they picked up their phone late at night. Maybe they imagined what they would say if you answered. Maybe they rehearsed entire conversations in their mind, only to put everything away before the first word ever left their lips. Oh my God, there's something heartbreaking about realizing that fear can sound incredibly reasonable while it's quietly stealing the very thing your heart longs for. The Two of Swords feels incredibly personal here. This isn't simply indecision. It feels like someone standing between two versions of themselves. One version wants to remain protected, predictable, untouched by emotional risk. The other wants to cross the distance, speak honestly, and finally allow love to be seen without conditions. Those two sides have been pulling against each other for longer than they care to admit, and the exhaustion of carrying both has become impossible to ignore. There's also a feeling that they assumed time would be patient enough to wait for them, that tomorrow would always offer another opportunity, that you would always understand, but people aren't meant to live forever in unanswered questions. Hearts eventually become tired of knocking on doors that never fully open. It seems like they're beginning to understand that your quiet departure wasn't meant to punish them. It was simply the moment you chose peace over uncertainty, and that realization has settled into places within them that even they can no longer avoid looking at. There is something almost painfully human about this energy, because I keep seeing someone reaching for their phone, unlocking the screen, opening your conversation, and then setting it back down again. It happens more often than you might imagine. It feels like every message begins inside their heart, but somewhere between their heart and their hands, fear quietly takes over. The Page of Swords keeps appearing as if they're searching for the perfect words, believing that if they can't say everything exactly right, perhaps it's safer not to say anything at all. I don't think they're struggling because they have nothing to say. It actually feels like the opposite. There are too many thoughts moving through their mind all at once. Every possible beginning seems to lead them toward another question. Should I apologize first? Should I explain? Should I pretend nothing happened? Would Libra even answer? Yeah, their mind keeps creating conversation after conversation, yet none of them ever seem complete enough to send. The Eight of Swords carries a very different feeling here. This isn't someone being held back by another person. It feels like they're being held back by the stories they've been telling themselves. They imagine rejection before giving themselves the chance to be heard. They picture silence before allowing hope to exist. It's almost as though they've built an invisible room around themselves, convincing themselves that every exit is locked, even though some of those doors were never truly closed. I keep sensing that they wonder about your life much more than you realize. They ask themselves if you've found peace without them, if you're smiling more, if someone else has become the person they never had the courage to be. They don't necessarily believe you've forgotten them, but they worry that you finally discovered something they couldn't offer when you needed it most, a sense of emotional safety. Oh my God! That thought seems to stay with them longer than anything else. The Nine of Swords feels incredibly quiet tonight. Not dramatic, not chaotic, just heavy. The kind of heaviness that settles into the room after everyone else has gone to sleep. It seems like there are nights when they replay entire conversations that never actually happened. They imagine you listening patiently while they finally explain everything they couldn't explain before. They picture themselves admitting that fear made them hesitate, that pride made them silent, That uncertainty made them appear much colder than they ever intended to be. Yet, every imagined conversation ends with the same lingering uncertainty, because they don't know whether those words would arrive too late. There is also a feeling that they're beginning to understand something they overlooked for a very long time. Healing changes people. They wonder if you've become stronger during this separation. They wonder if you've learned to live without waiting for answers. That realization carries both admiration and sadness. They wanted you to remain close enough that returning would feel easy, but they also know your heart wasn't meant to stay suspended in unanswered questions forever. The Eight of Wands doesn't feel rushed to me. It feels like momentum quietly gathering beneath the surface, almost like water building behind a dam that can no longer hold everything back. The desire to communicate keeps growing stronger than the fear of making a mistake. They may still hesitate. They may still rewrite every sentence before speaking. But something inside them seems tired of living entirely inside imagined conversations. It feels like the distance has stopped protecting them and has started revealing everything they were trying so hard not to face, leaving only one path that continues to pull gently at their heart, one honest word at a time. It feels like life has gently stopped asking this person whether they're ready to grow. Instead, it's presenting them with experiences they can no longer avoid. I keep sensing unexpected changes around them. Plans that once felt certain no longer look the same. Priorities have quietly shifted. People they once depended on may not be showing up in the ways they expected. It's almost as if the ground beneath their feet has been rearranged, encouraging them to see themselves from an entirely different perspective. The Wheel of Fortune sits here so naturally, reminding me that sometimes change doesn't ask for permission. It simply arrives and begins turning every page we thought had already been written. There is something incredibly reflective about the energy surrounding them. They aren't just remembering the past anymore. They're beginning to understand it. That's a very different experience. I keep sensing moments where they suddenly recognize why certain conversations with you carried so much weight. Things you once said that may have sounded difficult to hear are returning with surprising clarity. Words they dismissed are beginning to make perfect sense because life has quietly placed them in situations where those same lessons are unfolding firsthand. Yeah, it's almost poetic in a way. The understanding didn't come because someone argued harder. It came because experience became the teacher. Sometimes reality speaks much louder than advice ever could. Judgment feels deeply personal in this reading. I don't see someone judging themselves with cruelty. I see someone waking up emotionally. There is a feeling that they've started asking questions that reach far beyond the relationship itself. Why did I react that way? Why was vulnerability so uncomfortable? Why did I mistake emotional distance for strength? Those questions don't seem to have immediate answers, but they are opening doors inside this person's heart that have remained closed for a very long time. I also keep sensing that they're looking back at the version of themselves who met you. They can recognize how much fear quietly shaped their decisions, even when they appeared confident on the outside. There were moments when they believed protecting themselves meant avoiding difficult conversations, delaying commitment, or pretending everything was under control. Looking through today's perspective, those choices no longer seem as convincing as they once did. Libra, there is something beautiful about your energy within this reading, because it feels like you represented balance long before they understood why balance mattered. You weren't asking for perfection. You weren't asking for impossible promises. It seems like you simply wanted honesty, consistency, and the freedom to build something where both hearts could breathe without constantly wondering where they stood. They may not have fully understood that at the time, but life appears to be revealing it piece by piece. The Strength card carries a surprisingly gentle presence here. This doesn't feel like loud courage. It feels quieter than that. It feels like the courage to admit mistakes without hiding behind excuses. The courage to look directly at uncomfortable truths instead of turning away. Oh my God! Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do isn't proving they're right. It's allowing themselves to become someone different from who they were yesterday. I keep sensing that certain challenges they're facing have less to do with punishment and more to do with preparation. Every difficult conversation, every disappointment, every unexpected ending seems to be peeling away another layer of pride that no longer serves them. There is a softness beginning to replace defensiveness, a willingness to listen where they once insisted on having every answer. You may never fully realize how often your quiet presence continues to influence this person's inner world. Even without constant communication, something about your connection seems to remain alive inside them, gently reminding them of the kind of relationship they truly wanted but didn't yet know how to protect. As these lessons continue unfolding, it feels like they're becoming less concerned with preserving the image they once carried and much more interested in becoming someone whose actions finally match what their heart has been trying to say all along. It feels like something inside this person has finally grown tired of pretending. Pretending that everything is fine takes an incredible amount of energy, especially when your heart keeps whispering a completely different truth. I keep sensing that they're no longer trying to convince themselves that distance is easier than closeness. The silence they once leaned on as protection doesn't seem comforting anymore. Instead, it feels empty. It feels like a room that echoes with everything they never allowed themselves to say. The Queen of Cups carries such a gentle presence across this reading. Every time I look at this card, your energy feels incredibly calm, Libra. Not because life has been easy, but because you've slowly learned how to protect your own peace. There's a feeling that this person has begun noticing that about you. They remember how safe it felt to simply exist beside you. They remember conversations that didn't require masks, moments where they didn't have to perform or prove anything. Yeah, they may not have appreciated that sense of peace while they were living inside it, but they certainly recognize its absence now. I also keep sensing that they're comparing everything around them to the emotional comfort they experienced with you. It isn't necessarily about finding someone else or replacing the connection. It's more like realizing that genuine emotional safety is incredibly rare. People can fill a room with noise, but very few can create the kind of quiet where another person's soul finally feels understood. Somehow, Libra, your presence became that place for them, even if they didn't fully understand it until much later. The world feels incredibly significant here. It doesn't seem like an ending born from loss. It feels more like someone gently closing the door on an old version of themselves. There are habits they no longer wish to carry, defenses that have become too exhausting to maintain. Patterns that once felt familiar are beginning to feel too small for the person they're slowly becoming. Oh my God, sometimes healing isn't about discovering someone new. Sometimes it's about finally letting go of the version of yourself that kept pushing love away. I keep sensing that they're becoming much more intentional. They don't seem interested in repeating the same cycle with different words. They understand, at least on some level, that returning without changing would only reopen the same wounds. There is a quiet desire to build something that feels steady instead of uncertain, something that grows through honesty rather than assumptions. The Ace of Pentacles arrives almost like a gentle invitation, not loud, not dramatic. Just a simple feeling that perhaps a stronger foundation is finally possible if both hearts are willing to place the first stone differently this time. The Queen of Wands brings a completely different energy into the reading. It feels like confidence is beginning to replace hesitation. Not perfect confidence, of course. There are still nerves. There are still unanswered questions, but it seems like courage is slowly becoming stronger than fear. I keep seeing someone practicing difficult conversations in their mind, not because they're trying to manipulate the outcome, but because they genuinely want their words to reflect the sincerity they've struggled to express for so long. There is also a feeling that they're no longer waiting for life to magically create the perfect moment. They're beginning to understand that meaningful moments are often created by ordinary choices, a message, a conversation, an apology offered without expectations, a willingness to listen instead of defend. Those small acts suddenly feel much more valuable than protecting an image that never truly reflected who they were inside. What touches me most about this energy is that it doesn't feel driven by loneliness alone. It feels driven by recognition. Recognition of what this connection awakened within them. Recognition of the peace they found in your presence. recognition that love becomes much more beautiful when it stops competing with fear. That realization seems to be settling into their heart with surprising clarity, quietly encouraging them to move towards something they've spent far too long standing away from. It feels like the space between the two of you is no longer filled only with silence. It's beginning to fill with truth. Not the kind of truth that arrives all at once, but the quiet kind that slowly finds its way into someone's heart after they've stopped running from it. I keep sensing this person standing at the edge of an important decision, realizing that there are feelings they've carried for far too long without ever giving them a voice. They don't seem interested in finding the perfect excuse anymore. If anything, they're searching for the courage to simply be honest. The moon appears with such a soft energy here. It doesn't feel confusing anymore. It feels revealing. Hidden emotions are gently rising to the surface, almost asking to be acknowledged instead of ignored. I keep sensing that this person is beginning to understand the difference between protecting themselves and hiding from themselves. For so long, those two things felt exactly the same. But they aren't. One creates peace, while the other quietly creates loneliness. They're finally recognizing which path they've been walking. Yeah. I also feel that they're no longer trying to rewrite the past in their mind. Instead, they're wondering how to face it with humility. They know there were moments when you deserved honesty and received silence instead. Moments when you needed reassurance, but were left with uncertainty. It seems like they're carrying those memories differently now. Not as something they want to escape, but as something they genuinely wish they had handled with greater care. Temperance brings such a calming presence into this reading. There is a feeling that healing is happening slowly, almost like two rivers finding a way to flow toward the same ocean after traveling separate paths. This doesn't feel rushed. It doesn't feel forced. It simply feels like emotional balance is becoming more important than being right. Oh my God! Sometimes the most meaningful apology isn't created by beautiful words. It's created by a heart that has finally become willing to live differently than before. I keep sensing this person imagining what they would say if they had the chance to sit across from you without fear, without pride, without all the walls they once believed they needed. It wouldn't be a speech designed to impress you. It would probably be much simpler than that. Something like, "I understand more now than I did before." Or maybe, "I'm sorry that I made you carry questions I should have answered." There is a quiet sincerity surrounding these thoughts that feels very different from the energy they once carried. The Page of Pentacles feels almost symbolic of a first step. Not a grand promise, not an attempt to erase everything overnight. Just one honest movement toward rebuilding trust. It seems like this person is beginning to understand that meaningful connections aren't restored through dramatic gestures. They're rebuilt through consistency, accountability, patience, and the willingness to show up differently, one day at a time. The Magician brings a beautiful shift into the atmosphere. I don't see manipulation here. I see intention. I see someone realizing that they still have the ability to choose a different future, instead of remaining trapped inside an old story. They're no longer waiting for circumstances to change before they change themselves. It feels like they're beginning to understand that every meaningful transformation starts with one decision, and that decision is usually much quieter than people expect. Libra, what touches me most about this energy is that it doesn't ask you to abandon everything you've learned about yourself during this journey. It simply reminds you that healing has many different expressions. Sometimes healing means letting go. Sometimes it means allowing a conversation that never happened to finally exist. Sometimes it simply means allowing both people to meet each other as they are today, instead of who they used to be. Whatever unfolds from here seems less connected to old fears and much more connected to two hearts that have slowly learned the value of honesty, compassion, and the quiet courage it takes to begin again. Whatever this connection becomes from here, I hope you remember something, Libra. Your heart was never asking for perfection. It was simply asking for honesty, for consistency, and for someone willing to meet you where love feels peaceful instead of uncertain. Maybe that's the quiet lesson this reading wanted to leave with you today. If some part of this story found its way into your own, take only what truly resonates and leave the rest with the cards. Thank you for spending this little moment with me. You mean more to this community than you probably realize, and I genuinely look forward to sharing another reading with you very soon. Until then, be gentle with yourself and take good care.